Look, I don't often do media commentary on this channel. However, with the release of two controversial pieces of media, Disney's live-action Snow White and Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Shadows, I couldn't help but think of Andrew Breitbart's words. Politics is downstream of culture, and that is undeniable. From movies to TV shows, video games and music, left-wing thought dominates. Big YouTubers may bash the left for focusing on the message, as the critical drinker would say, but despite flops or backlash, the institutions that control media keep pumping out content, unbothered. For them, it's not just about money, it's about narrative control. When you control the stories a society tells, you control its future. That's real power, the kind Yuri Bezmenov warned about decades ago. Not with bullets, but with stories, media, and education, slowly reshaping culture until identity, meaning, and truth blur. Whether you believe his warnings or not, it worked. And the right? Well, the right doesn't have any of that. No studios, no streaming giants, no mainstream music labels, no major influence over what the next generation watches, plays, or sings along to. It complains, it critiques, but it doesn't create. So today, let's explore why the right, despite all its talk of culture wars, has failed to build its own cultural machine. Here's the thing, it wasn't always like this. Before woke was even a word, the forces we now label the right shaped culture. The church, monarchies, and aristocratic orders were the original tastemakers. During the Renaissance, your job as an artist wasn't to challenge power, it was to glorify it. Michelangelo didn't paint the Sistine Chapel to spark a revolution. He did it because the Catholic Church told him to and paid him handsomely. Handel's sacred music uplifted God, crown, and country. Art back then was a megaphone for tradition, a tool to reinforce hierarchy and piety. Even during the Enlightenment, kings and noble houses poured money into art to preserve the old ways. In that world, conservatives didn't complain about culture, they were the culture. Then came the 20th century. After World War II, and especially by the 1960s, the cultural winds shifted. The post-war boom brought prosperity, which led to boredom, and boredom sparked rebellion. The civil rights movement, Vietnam, the sexual revolution, feminism, LSD, and rock and roll all fueled a generation that declared the old rules oppressive. They turned to art, music, film, and literature to tear down the old order. Hollywood discarded outdated moral codes. Rock stars mocked religion. Avant-garde artists challenged every norm. It was loud, messy, and it worked. By the decade's end, as historian Stephen J. Ross observed, the entertainment industry had shifted decisively leftward. Institutions that once upheld conservative values now deconstructed them. The culture wars had begun, and the left was winning, slowly seizing power by controlling stories, as Marxist Antonio Gramsci suggested. And by the time the right realized what was happening, it was too late. However, it's not solely about institutions or history. The answer may start at the individual level, in the minds of the creators. Political psychology shows that people who lean liberal score higher on openness to experience, a trait linked to imagination, curiosity, and risk-taking. In other words, the mindset that drives art. Conservatives, by contrast, generally score higher on conscientiousness, favoring structure, order, and stability. This doesn't mean conservatives aren't creative. It just means that on average, those drawn to the kind of risk-taking art that challenges norms tend to lean left. It's a self-selection effect. The arts attract people willing to live in uncertainty, break rules, even their own. In some studies, these traits correlate with lower agreeableness and even higher narcissism, fueling the bold, uncompromising vision behind great art. And then there's the environment. Creative industries aren't neutral. They are ecosystems that lean overwhelmingly left, from Hollywood to academia. From the moment a young artist enters a college program or workshop, they're immersed in a cultural consensus that rarely includes right-wing ideas. Expressing conservative views in those circles can be career suicide. So, most stay quiet, some self-censor, and others leave entirely. The creative class becomes homogeneous, not through conspiracy, but by cultural reinforcement. The few right-leaning voices that do push through often find themselves in the margins, Christian film studios, niche book publishers, right-wing YouTube channels. Sometimes they strike gold, more often they preach to the choir. Meanwhile, the left has the full machine: institutions, awards, media coverage, viral buzz, all reinforcing its worldview. It's not just that the right lacks creators. The entire structure, from personality traits to peer networks to institutional incentives, is stacked in favor of one side. Speaking of favors, I'd like to ask one of you, and that is to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. All this has shaped the content we see today. Not too long ago, even from the 80s onward, art wasn't always overtly political. Movies like Predator, Independence Day, Rush Hour, and Terminator were universally accepted, masculine, testosterone-fueled blockbusters that weren't burdened by an agenda. But by the early 2010s, things changed. The drive to subvert expectations, deliberate race swapping, unabashed political lecturing, and worst of all, the fear of offending anyone began dominating mainstream storytelling. Characters became symbols, and plots pivoted to revolve around messages rather than organically earned narratives. In the process, something crucial was lost: the rawness, energy, and universality of a good story. We went from stories that united us to stories that felt like ideological compliance tests, as if an HR department was watching every line. This was clear in recent media like the latest Dragon Age iteration, a once beloved video game series now floundering under toxic positivity and lackluster sales. Even the creators of an objectively great game in Hogwarts Legacy had to add in a trans character to try and appease the backlash from J.K. Rowling's personal stances. Yet, it didn't save them from getting a 1 out of 10 rating from Wired, who did not even bother playing the game. When nearly every major studio, writer's room, and awards committee leans the same way, even unconsciously, you end up with a monoculture. Perhaps that's why Rachel Zegler felt so comfortable spitting on the original Snow White, mocking the story, the prince, and the very idea of a fairy tale unfiltered by modern ideology. In her world, that wasn't controversial. It was expected, a product of the institutions that shaped her. Even if that film is the reason Disney is a cultural titan, conserving the past and honoring tradition aren't values of the left. In this monoculture, risk is punished and subversion is allowed only one way. Masculinity, nationalism, or tradition become punchlines. Naturally, seeing this imbalance, the right eventually tried to fight back, but the results were mixed. Consider the Christian film industry, pure flicks and the like. God's Not Dead plays out like a wish fulfillment fantasy where a college student takes on a strawman atheist professor and proves God in under 2 hours. Made on a $2 million budget and grossing over $60 million, it was a financial success, but culturally, it was panned. Critics dismissed it as a sermon masquerading as cinema. Then there's the Daily Wire's film push. Movies like Run, Hide, Fight and Terror on the Prairie show ambition, yet they struggle to escape the echo chamber. Run, Hide, Fight tackled a controversial subject with a pro-gun, hero narrative, but critics said its messaging was clumsy, more like an op-ed with explosions rather than a subtle story. And then there's PragerU, slick animated videos with millions of views that prove the right can succeed digitally, but they aren't storytelling. They're infotainment, delivering talking points without truly moving you. Perhaps the worst example is the Atlas Shrugged film trilogy. Ayn Rand's celebrated work was adapted into films that flopped miserably. Wooden acting, lifeless dialogue, and a focus on preaching rather than genuine narrative left the project preaching to a tiny choir while the broader culture shrugged. The recurring problem is clear. Many right-wing productions prioritize message over craft. Instead of crafting worlds where values emerge organically, they deliver blunt lectures. Characters become mouthpieces, and plots take a back seat, resulting in media that only resonates with a pre-selected base. Yet, not all is lost. There are standouts where right-coded content resonated widely. Take Top Gun Maverick. This 2022 sequel, hailed as a return to classic pro-American blockbuster filmmaking, became the highest grossing film of the year. It wasn't loaded with overt political messages, it told a compelling story about heroism and legacy. Its themes of duty, bravery, and meritocracy were seamlessly embedded, reminding us of a time when such values were the norm, now seen as radical by some. Even critics who usually roll their eyes had to admit, it was just a great movie. The lesson? When you lead with quality, when you focus on character and craft over ideology, even something that aligns with conservative values can go mainstream. In gaming, there's Kingdom Come Deliverance. This indie RPG from a Czech studio went viral by insisting on historical realism. Set in 15th century Bohemia, it deliberately avoided modern inclusivity measures. Controversy swirled, yet it sold over 1 million copies in its first month. We see this pattern in foreign media too. Japanese content isn't steeped in American progressive politics, so it often feels like a breath of fresh air. Attack on Titan, for instance, has been interpreted in wildly different ways, from critiques of fascism to bizarrely alt-right allegory. The truth is, it isn't overtly political at all. It's ambiguous and nuanced. And that's the point. Great art allows multiple interpretations. Then there's Black Myth Wukong, a Chinese action RPG that's become a cultural phenomenon. On launch, it sold over 10 million copies in just 3 days. By the end of its first month, it had passed 20 million. Its gross close to $1 billion, with over 2.2 million concurrent players on Steam, the platform's most played single-player game ever. And here's the kicker, it's not woke. It's built on Chinese mythology and traditional martial arts, delivering unfiltered storytelling without ideological guardrails. And then there's Squid Game, a brutal, brilliant Korean series that became a global sensation. It explores inequality and desperation without dictating how you should feel. It's bleak, violent, ambiguous, and audiences loved it for not preaching. Whether it's Attack on Titan, Wukong, or Squid Game, the projects that break through aren't trying to win a culture war. They're just trying to be great. In a landscape drowning in message-first media that feels revolutionary, American conservatives have embraced foreign content precisely because it doesn't lecture them. Sometimes it's not about agreeing with the message, it's about not being insulted by it. Even in Western media, examples like American Sniper, Gran Torino, and certain comic books have succeeded by being well-made and emotionally honest without announcing themselves as conservative. They tell a story and let values emerge organically. That's the difference between propaganda and art. And the fact that something like Top Gun Maverick now feels radical says more about the state of culture than anything else. So what does all this tell us? It tells us that conservatives can win in culture, but not by mimicking the left's approach or turning storytelling into a sermon. You don't change hearts with bullet points. You do it with stories that resonate emotionally, aesthetically, viscerally. The success of Black Myth Wukong and Squid Game proves that audiences crave authenticity, quality, and creative freedom, not ideology shoved down their throat. Ironically, foreign creators, detached from Western political narratives, are giving people exactly that. Meanwhile, much of the American right still treats culture as something to rebut rather than something to build. The left captured culture by telling better stories, taking creative risks, and building supporting institutions. Until the right does the same, embracing complexity, ambiguity, and even discomfort, they'll keep losing the cultural war by default. But if the right can shift its focus from preaching to creating, from clinging to the past to evolving it, then maybe, just maybe, there's still a shot at reclaiming some lost ground. Because at the end of the day, politics is downstream from culture. And culture, that still belongs to whoever tells the best story. Hey, you made it to the end. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe, turn on notifications, and give it a thumbs up. A massive thank you to my channel members and Patreon supporters. You are the backbone of this work. And if you'd like to join them, hit the join button below or swing by Patreon. I'd love to have you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.